I just realized I touched the microphone. That's a polite way of saying we're not 100% sure they know what they're doing. And at that point, the power supply of that amplifier gave up, and every capacitor emptied itself on the floor, and we had blue flames shooting up through that amplifier. And for the next 3 years when I worked at that shop, every time I walked by that spot on the floor, I was reminded of the charred spot in our carpeting. Hi, I'm Bob McConnell with Transparent Audio, and I'm here to answer your questions about Transparent and how to put Transparent into great music systems. Well, our philosophy on this is that there are a great many cable companies out there trying to do good work, but the stories they tell about how they get the sound they get are maybe a bit questionable scientifically. Transparent's philosophy is that the measurable properties of a cable, of capacitance, inductance, and resistance, are really the things that dictate the performance of that cable in an audio system making music. Transparent doesn't let those things be random, whereas most pieces of wire off a spool with ends put on them, it's a bit of a roll of the dice. You're not always going to get the results you expected compared to what you heard in your own listening room at the showroom. So with Transparent, we work on balancing those properties, and as you go further up into our ranges, we even take into account the fact that the electronics will influence the behavior of those properties, and we work to correct that as well. Up to the point where with our Magnum Opus product, we're dialing it in to about 3 millimeters of copper for absolute perfection on those electrical properties, which influence and in fact dictate the sound of what a cable does in a system. Right. On any of our cables, there's a box, with the exception of digital cables where the frequencies that they're handling are very different. But in analog signal propagation, there is an idea that we came across many years ago that a signal transmission system should be as large as is necessary for the signals it's carrying, but no larger. Therefore, we do reduce the overall bandwidth of our cables so that they do not allow signals to pass in the megahertz and gigahertz region. But they still have frequency response many, many octaves above audible sound. By doing that, we shift the efficiency of the cable down into where audible music lives, which are low frequency phenomenon. And by doing that, we believe we get a better fundamental balance of all of the musical values of tone, dynamics, and spaciousness that the ear and the brain will recognize as more like live music. So the box corrects the cable to get to our electrical ideals, and then in the higher end cables, it also includes correction for the electrical characteristics of the component that drives the cable. At Transparent, we believe that the system behaves as a whole, and therefore you will do better if you elevate the cables into the same level. And if you want to make a gradual improvement, first start at the source component, your primary listening source, and elevate it one level, and then bring everything up to that level that's an important part of your signal path. Naturally, if you have a secondary source or something you don't use all that often, it's not absolutely essential that it be at the same level of performance as your primary system components. And there you can make a little bit of a savings. But in general, if you're, let's say, at our super level and you want more music, elevate your source component to the ultra level, and then bring up your preamp to amp, and finally your speaker cable, so that the whole way through that chain you have ultra characteristics. We're going to reveal more of our core musical qualities starting from the source. Okay. Power cables are disturbingly important. And again, there's a lot of misunderstanding about how power works and why a power cable would matter. The greatest misunderstanding is the thought process that somehow power is a push phenomenon, that the power has come from a generation station into a substation, to the transformer on the pole outside your home, and then into your home panel box onto your component. So how could the last 2 meters of a cable matter when it's traveled tens or even hundreds of kilometers? The reality is, electricity is a draw phenomenon, and it doesn't even begin to flow until you ask the wall for power. So those first 2 meters are where the component makes its first gulp through the straw. And if that's limited in any way, you lose dynamics, you lose tonal quality, and you lose the things that make spatial reality happen. So power chords are important. They radically affect a system once the analog signal path is fully sorted. I would say, do the analog cables first and get them to a level that's elevated to the level of performance you desire, then start playing with power chords. And start with the power chord on your source component. You might think, oh, my amplifier has much more draw, therefore it needs a better power chord. That's true, but it can't fix the fact the tonality of your source might be slightly off by little limitations of its ability to draw and access power easily. Remember, in electronic stereo music reproduction, everything is basically components referencing a power source. If that power source is diminished in any way, you're immediately dealing with loss. We like our banana connectors for the cable ranges up to and including, I would say, ultra, with the type of banana that we have created using what's called a Deltron style pin banana, where there is a lot of surface contact. It's not just the little springs on the outside of a pin. It's very, very good, and at those levels of resolution I don't think you would really notice a difference, provided it's a good firm connection. But on the higher end cables, we prefer a spade lug because you can lock it down. Our tellurium copper spades have a little bit of give to them because of the copper content, so they compress ever so slightly and you get a gas impermeable connection, which means that you've got essentially a firm contact right there. So we prefer spades on the higher end cables. Also, the higher end cables have a tendency to be slightly heavier. Therefore, the spade can lock in and give an anchored connection without the effects of maybe weight pulling on the connector and causing it to have a slight disconnect from time to time. Absolutely, cable burn-in is a thing. It's not that wires are inherently directional, but as they get used, the relationship of the conductor to the dielectric achieves a bias. It has a tendency to get comfortable going in one direction, and at that point the cable is fully fleshed in. When we design, we work with fully broken in cables to do our final voicing. So to hear the finality of our sound, you do want to give it about 48 hours of initial burn-in, and then over the course of the next several hundred hours you will get the ends of what might happen. Also, we have slight capacitance, inductive and resistive elements in our cables. Those elements are in parallel, not in series, so we never cut the wire and put a circuit in there. Instead, we put component parts over top of the wire to give bypass circuits that imply the values we have to get to our ideals. But they do gradually break in. Lastly, there is a little bit of break-in in the listening. Once you start hearing things that sound more natural, more complete, and more musical, you hear more. You become more virtuosic in the way your system sounds, and therefore the listener breaks in a little bit too.